Howdy y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about fall turnover. And today is Thanksgiving and I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. I hope you're having a good one. And I am thankful for everyone watching my channel and giving me input and just being there to support me. I really am thankful for everybody doing that. It gives me a lot of satisfaction knowing that I can help people with their fishing. So today we're going to be talking about fall turnover. A lot of people hear that word but they don't know what it means. They know it's a bad thing, and to some extent for a shore fisherman it really does mean harder times are coming, but it doesn't have to be that way. If you use some of these tips you may have better success in this difficult time period of fishing. So first of all, what is fall turnover? Well, in the summer you have warm water stacked on top of cold water, and the bass will be in this warmer band of water because this layer has more oxygen. The temperature's warmer, they're going to stay there, they're going to be more active because they're cold-blooded. The colder water has less oxygen and they tend not to stay in that layer. And even in the summer there'll be a third layer in the hottest part of summer near the surface that may actually be even too hot. So while the fish can sort of move in and out of these layers, they won't stay there for very long. They can totally dip down into the cold and they can totally get up into the hot. Especially if they're feeding, they will come up and they'll feed in that layer, but they'll return back to the comfort zone that they like. Now what happens in the fall, you have the turnover, which is the warm water has cooled to the point where it is sinking and the cold water gets pushed up and everything on the bottom, all that decaying vegetation and stuff that's accumulated, gets pushed up. And what happens is the water gets cloudy, it gets a funky smell like rotten vegetation, and basically the oxygen levels equalize. So what that means is fish can be anywhere now. They're not limited to just that warm layer where there was good oxygen. They can go deep, they can go shallow, they can be anywhere. And that's what really makes fall fishing tough, is trying to find where these fish are. You know, in the summer you had little hot spots where they would hang out, where the temperature was fairly stable, where they could ambush prey, but now they're everywhere. So, what do? What can you do? Well, obviously if you have a boat, you're in a better position to cover more water, use your electronics to find these fish. But if you're a shore fisherman, you have other things that you can try to do to sort of help catch some fish. And like I said before, having a boat is an advantage and being on the shore is a limitation, but that doesn't mean you can't catch fish. It just means you're going to have to do a little more work. So first of all, fish can and will be everywhere in a turned over lake. A good thing to do is to sort of run and gun. If you're fishing a spot in the summertime produced and there's nothing there, don't stay there. Just keep moving. Fish in the deeper water will be suspending. Almost all the time the fish will be suspended in that deep water, and it can be kind of hard to catch them. So you want to fish suspending type lures. You can use crankbaits, you can use jerkbaits. Jerkbaits are really good, and depending on the water during the particular time of day, they may be more or less active. So that's another thing to try. In the colder times of the year, it takes longer for the water to warm up, and the warmer the water, the more active the fish will be. So you want to kind of aim for the middle part of the day. Give your lake or wherever you're fishing time to warm up, because that'll really help with the bite. Another thing you can try is if you're having tough luck on a lake, the smaller the lake, the faster the lake will warm up. So if you're having bad luck at your lake, you might want to switch up to something smaller. The temperature can really change faster on a smaller lake. There's less water volume. Cloudy water, try chatterbaits and spinners. When the water's cloudy, especially in the middle of a turnover, if you have no choice but to fish during the turnover when the water's cloudy, you might want to try something that is sort of in the middle of the water column that puts out a lot of vibration, because when fish can't see, they're less apt to bite. And chatterbaits and spinners, spin baits, they put out a lot of thump, so you know they might be apt to see that go by them and feel it. You know, they'll feel it before they see it, I guarantee you. But when they finally do see it, they might latch on. That you can use rattling crankbaits as well. You know, something that puts out some sound. You can jig near cover. Sometimes the fish will be holding your cover. Definitely slow down your fishing. Unless the water temperature has risen into like the upper 50s, I would definitely fish a little bit slower, because they're cold-blooded. They're going to be a little sluggy, and the colder the water, the more sluggy. If you're on a lake and you don't have a lot of cover, there's not a lot to see or isn't visible, you can try fishing. Look for runoff, like storm drain runoff, springs, creeks, things like that. Sometimes there's a variation in the water temperature from these feeder creeks and springs and things like that. Can be as much as 2 degrees difference in temperature, and the fish will be there because of the change in temperature. So even, you know, a variation as small as 2 degrees can really make a difference. And sewer runoff, as disgusting as it sounds, a lot of times storm drain runoff is going to be warmer than the water in the lake, and that is a good hot spot. Just like power plant discharge, usually pretty warm water, fish will be hanging out around that area. It's a pretty common tactic. In Maryland, it's pretty tough because our lakes are man-made, especially in my part of the state. These lakes have all been graded by bulldozers, so there's really not a lot to the bottom of them. It's kind of like a big swimming pool, you know. It may have a deep part, it may be fairly far out, and if the fish are in that sort of graded deeper end, you may not be able to reach them without a boat, and that would be a good time to say, you know, if you fish shallow and you haven't gotten a bite, you may want to switch up to a smaller lake. That would be my best advice. You know, however long it is, I think you'll get to that point where you're just like, man, I'm not getting anything. You know, if you feel like you've covered as much as you can, then it may be time to just pack it in, check out a different, smaller lake, or just a different lake period, because there's a lot of variation between these lakes. I fished 2 lakes really close to each other, and the difference between them is amazing. The lake that I do a lot of my videos is constantly muddy. It never changes. Even during the turnover, it was really difficult to tell if it was going through turnover because it really didn't change a lot. The only way I could really tell was there was a slick. That's something else I wanted to bring up. Figuring out if your lake is in turnover. Like I said, sometimes it can be difficult if your lake is pretty cloudy to begin with, but you know, use your nose. You can smell the turnover. All that stuff on the bottom coming up, it's decomposing, and it's going to give off a very distinctive odor that smells. It's kind of hard to describe, but it reminded me a lot of grass that you left under a grass pile and you turned it over and you smell that kind of green, gassy kind of smell. That's kind of what turnover smells like. You'll know it. Different lakes have different, you know, all that stuff come to the surface, you'll be able to see it. It'll be like this scum on the top. And depending on the lake, it may be brown. On my lake, it was green. Not entirely sure what it was, but I could tell that it came from the bottom. So there's really no textbook way to judge by the surface stuff, you know, if your lake is in turnover, but you'll smell it. I guarantee you, you'll notice it. It's pretty stinky. So like I said before, smaller lakes, smaller, you know, ponds and things like that, the turnover is going to be less dramatic, because the smaller the water volume, the less effect it has on the fish. They're sort of in it, they're more used to it. On a bigger lake, it can be days before the fish recover from that temperature drop. It really puts them in, it's kind of like taking a fish and, you know, from a pet store and throwing them into your aquarium without equalizing the temperature. They're going to be a little shell shocked, and they're not going to want to feed. They're going to be stressed. And that is probably the worst time to fish, is right after a cold front. And on top of that, having a turnover, it's just one of the toughest times to fish. And I was unfortunately unlucky enough to be right in that a few days back. I went out to fish and the conditions were just too hard. I mean, some days you just got to pack it in and say, I'm going to give it a few days. I mean, if you choose to fish during that time, just be realistic that this is a difficult time. Cold, muddy water during a turnover is probably one of the toughest fishing conditions you will ever have as a shore fisherman. So those are my tips. I hope that it's been helpful. I know that fall fishing can be really frustrating. Just stick to it. Use some of the tips that I pointed out, and don't be afraid to switch lakes. I mean, sometimes that can just play a huge difference. And at the worst, you know, give it a week or so, and then if you want to go back to your favorite lake, you'll find that conditions have changed. After the turnover, what happens is all that surface stuff that came up from the bottom will go back down and settle, and things will calm down, and fish will go back to being a little more normal. You're still going to be in a cold weather pattern, depending on where you live, and of course you're not going to have as easy of a time as when it's warmer, but you can still catch fish. It's not impossible. So don't just give up on the fishing season because it's cold. Just switch up your game. So I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving, and hopefully I'll have a new video coming out soon. I'm going to try to head out and hit some spots. I was thinking about doing some urban trout fishing, depending on whether or not the trout have survived our cold snap. It was pretty brutal. And a lot of times when you have a huge jump in temperatures like that, it will kill fish. It doesn't happen often, but some fish are more sensitive, and these stocked fish tend to get pretty shell shocked and sometimes even die from the temperature drop. We went from literally upper 60s one day to, you know, 40s, high 30s. And at nighttime it was dropping down in the 20s, so that can really make an effect on fish. But we seem to be back out of that cold snap, and hopefully things are going to get a little better. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching. Have a happy Thanksgiving.